In our last video, we looked at how YHVH, the deity YHVH, is introduced into the territory of Ephraim and then Benjamin by the Shasu. We're going to look today at evidence of this cult in the territory of Ephraim, and then we would continue with how YHVH then enters into Jerusalem. To do that, let's start with these examples of evidence of the Hebrews or the Israelites, let me put it that way, not worshiping Yahweh universally. Now, the Judean and Israelite toponyms from millennia past suggest that YHVH was not universally worshipped as the God of Israel until the start of the first millennium. How do we know this? Place names identified deities, other deities, such as Anat, Baal, Dagon, El, Yerihu, Shalimu, and Shamash, firmly entrenched in ancient cultures at this time, including that of Israel. These toponyms, these place names, testify to the fact that YHVH was not universally worshipped as the God of Israel. Jeremiah 1 is a scriptural evidence of one of these deities. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests of Anathoth. Anathoth is the deity Anat. It's coming from the name of the deity Anat. And this is the place of origin of the prophet Jeremiah. When we come to 2 Samuel 5, we read, the Philistines came and spread out over the valley of Rephaim. David inquired of YHVH, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands? And YHVH answered David, go up, and I will deliver the Philistines into your hands. Thereupon David marched to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there. So Baal Perazim is actually coming from the deity Baal. Let's continue to read because this is interesting. Thereupon David marched to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there, and he said, YHVH has broken through my enemies before me as waters break through a dam. That is why the place was named Baal Perazim. That is Baal of the breaches. You would think that the name would be YHVH Perazim, but it's actually Baal Perazim. So this is the place where David defeats the Philistines, and this is the name. Maybe Baal here is just means Lord, could be, but you don't see YHVH Perazim. You see Baal Perazim. In Joshua 15, we read, this was the portion of the tribe of the Judites by their clans. And then we get some clans. And then we come to verses 41. We hear Beth Dagon. Beth Dagon. Beth Dagon is coming from the deity Dagon. And this is a place in the territory of Judah. It's a place in the territory of Judah. We come to Joshua 6. We read, now Jericho was shut up tight because of the Israelites. No one could leave or enter. Jericho, that name is coming from Yerihu. And Yerihu is a name that derives from that of a moon god. A moon god. Yerihu, Jericho. In 1 Samuel 6, we read, take the ark of Yahweh and place it on the cart and put next to it in a chest the gold objects you are paying him as indemnity. Send it off and let it go its own way. Then watch. If it goes up to the road to Beth Shemesh, if it goes up the road to Beth Shemesh, Beth Shemesh is coming from the deity Shamesh. That's the name there, Shamesh. And Beth Shemesh, it's a place dedicated to the sun god near Jerusalem that served as the resting place for the Ark of Covenant. And when we mention Jerusalem, we see the deity Shalimu, 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 which is attested in Ugaritic text as the god of the dusk, the god of the dusk. This is why I say that these place names identify these deities, suggesting that Yud-Heh-Vav-He was not universally worshipped as the God of Israel until near the start of the first millennium. Ancient cultures paid homage to a pantheon of deities which were associated with fertility, harvest seasons, and the bounty of reaping, including Israel. Awesome. Moving on. So, like I said, our last video, we saw how the Shasu slash the Hapiru, this group, introduced the deity Yud-Heh-Vav-He into the territory of Ephraim and then Benjamin, which is into the northern kingdom. Now we are going to see how it gets into the south, how it gets into Jerusalem. But before we do the Jerusalem piece, let's see whether this is accurate. The introduction of Yud-Heh-Vav-He into the territory of Ephraim and Benjamin. I'll focus on Ephraim. Judges 18, we read, the maintained and sculptured image that Micah had made throughout the time that the house of Elohim stood at Shiloh. The house of Elohim stood as Shiloh. This verse evokes the era when the house of God was at Shiloh, when the house of Elohim was at Shiloh. This is where the Shasu slash Hapiru introduced Yud-Heh-Vav-He to in the territory of Ephraim in the north. They introduced it to the sanctuary at Shiloh. At Shiloh, archaeological digs confirm that a significant cult site existed during the transformative period from late Bronze to the Iron Age. This location was first occupied in the second millennium BC and surged with activity again centuries later, around 1050 BCE, only to be destroyed by fire, possibly at the hands of the Philistines. Although sparsely inhabited afterwards, occupation continued until as late as 700 BCE, 7th century. So Shiloh, after it was destroyed by fire, Shiloh was sparsely inhabited afterwards in about the 8th and 7th centuries. This is what we have from archaeology. This is the evidence that we have. This is the data that we have. The biblical authors knew the importance or the significance of Shiloh, and they seem to have been concerned to emphasize this. They were also haunted by the memory and history that Shiloh had been a place where YHVH sanctuary once stood. This is the evidence on the ground. So what did they do? In the early 600s, in the early 6th century, stories of Shiloh as a holy place to worship YHVH were still vivid in the people's mind. This sacred site had passed down through generations, and its memories remained deeply ingrained within those who experienced it. But the authors wanted to present a new agenda. What was this agenda, and why was Shiloh a problem for them? So we have archaeological evidence of this old cult here at Shiloh. The populace had in their memories this old court place at Shiloh. In the early 6th centuries, when the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, there is a new theology that the priestly group wants to create, wants to push. There is an agenda. What was this agenda, and why was Shiloh a problem for them? Well, through the book of Joshua, we get an understanding of how Canaan was first conquered by the Israelites. What you should know is that these conquests in the book of Joshua are legends and not historical. I repeat that. The conquests narratives that you have in the book of Joshua, they are not historical, they are rather legends. In a later series, we're going to explore how the book of Joshua was ingeniously written in the 7th century. Contrary to popular belief, there wasn't a conquest that took place. Instead, diverse groups, such as those from the Shasu and Apiru, simply chose Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh for their god amongst people who were already living in the land of Canaan, meaning that the group Israel was formed by natives who accepted fragments from the Shasu and Apiru people. Along with them came their beloved deity Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Like I said, in a different series, we would explore how the book of Joshua actually came about and what influenced these military conquests that we read in the book. Now, this momentous legendary conquest is said to have been marked with the construction of a religious sanctuary, what we call the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, loosely translated that way. This mobile sanctuary acted both as a place for communal worship and face to face meetings between Moshe and the deity. What you should know as well that this verse comes from a late stratum within the book and corresponds with priestly views on mobile sanctuaries that served both Moshe and the deity Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh during their travel in the desert. And where is that priestly ideology? or the priestly view of a mobile sanctuary. When your temple is destroyed, a mobile sanctuary theology seems very attractive. That is how you put the pieces together to try to save your theological stance. So, mobile sanctuaries, because the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, so they had to reinvent their theology. And that is what you see play here in the book of Joshua. But stories of Shiloh as a holy place to worship YHVH was still vivid in people's minds. You cannot just get up and make up stories. Shiloh, like I said, is an old cultic place where there was the worship of El alongside YHVH. So to change the theology would be a bit challenging and problematic. They had to solve this. How do you solve or how do you come up with a new theology when stories of Shiloh as a holy place to worship the deity YHVH were still vivid in people's minds? Because this sacred site had passed down through generations and its memories remained deeply ingrained within those who experienced it. How did they deal with this problem or concern since the memory of Shiloh as a sanctuary of YHVH was still very much alive when these texts were written down in the 6th century? What was their solution? The editors interpreted the destruction of Shiloh as having been caused by YHVH himself. This is how they get around it. The temple is no longer or was no longer destroyed, burnt down by the Philistines. It was YHVH himself that caused the destruction of Shiloh. We see that in Jeremiah 7. Do you consider this house, which bears my name, to be a den of thieves? As for me, I have been watching, declares YHVH. Just go to my place at Shiloh, where I had established my name formerly, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. Verse 14. Therefore, I will do to the house which bears my name, on which you rely, and to the place which I gave you and your fathers, just what I did to Shiloh. In Jeremiah 26, we see the same thing. Say to them, thus says YHVH, if you do not obey me, abiding by the teaching that I have set before you, heeding the words of my servants, the prophets, whom I have been sending to you persistently, but you have not heeded, then I will make this house like Shiloh. Verses 9. How dare you prophesy in the name of YHVH, that this house shall become like Shiloh, and this city be made desolate, without inhabitants? The same idea is found in the book of Psalms, Psalm 78. We read, they vexed him with their high places. They incensed him with their idols. God heard it and was enraged. He utterly rejected Israel. He forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had set among men. He let his might go into captivity, his glory into the hand of the foe. He gave his people over to the sword. He was enraged at his very own. Fire consumed their young men, and their maidens remained unwed. So, We have a shrine at Shiloh in the territory of Ephraim, which was also a shrine of YHVH. And this Shiloh plays a very important role in the book of Samuel. When we look at the opening narrative in the book of Samuel, it unveils a complex relationship between Samuel and Shiloh. We read that Samuel's mother devoted him to the sacred sanctuary of Shiloh, not just any tent. The Bible describes it as a temple with walls built to house YHVH himself. The pilgrimage taken by many in the book of Samuel denotes its importance, this place. Not only did pilgrims strive for spiritual understanding within those walls, but their reverence was also tethered tightly in history, with possible references that suggest that the sanctuary at Shiloh was home to captivating relics like statues bearing the image of the deity YHVH. Take note that YHVH has not entered into Jerusalem yet. He sure will be on his way soon after. He is going to be associated with the ark, and we shall find out what originally was in the ark and how he made his way down south into the Jerusalem temple. So, what have we demonstrated here? We have demonstrated here casually how the Shasu brought YHVH or introduced YHVH into the north. And then we looked to see whether there was an old sanctuary in the north, in Ephraim, and we come across Shiloh. And we see how the editors had to deal with this old cultic site and how they worked around it to push their own theology of a mobile sanctuary.